About beginning of September 2022, I was driving to the property where the Ark used to be located, and I was thinking about the whole mess that had ensued. I heard in my spirit that I knew the words. I had read the Word, but I needed the truth. This was multifaceted, because I knew it wasn't just about the Bible, but Jonathan Kleck as well. As far as the Bible was concerned, the Lord has had me reading the New Testament since the day I was told to by Him, March 30th, 2022. That testimony is incredible itself, as it was the Lord beginning to warn, insulate, and protect us from Jonathan. So I knew the Lord was telling me, even though I had been reading the Word, I truly needed to learn to more fully understand the Word. At the same time, I was understanding that the Lord was telling me the only way to fight the conditioning that Jonathan was doing was to use his own contradictory statements against him. Furthermore, I was being urged by the Lord to seek the origin of Jonathan's doctrine. Initially, I thought I was being urged to do the transcripts of his videos again and show comparisons of his own statements where they contradict, etc. So I began to pick up where I left off. I awoke at 3:30 a.m. my time because I couldn't sleep. So I began. Mind you, I had mapped out what I was to do. Seek the origins of his doctrine and to seek videos out where he was in obvious contradiction with himself. I was tired, but I started to watch Gene Revell's newest video at the time, but I just couldn't do it. Mind you, I am not fond of Gene's approach at all. He can be as snarky and demeaning as John is, but I understand his purposes. I do not know him. I have never spoken to him. The only reason I watched Gene was here was somebody who could see right through Jonathan and wasn't afraid to call him out, with proof. At any rate, I went into the other room and found a couch to lay down on, pray, and get some sleep if that was possible. I was in a prayerful half-asleep state, and I can't consciously remember all that I was being shown, but I do know the Lord was there. I was asking questions, running through things, seeking answers, the truth. One thing I remember that is truly important was a vision. I was shown clouds and rain where I used to live in Oregon. What is impactful is in this vision I was shown rain clouds coming off the ocean, hitting the first mountain range, the coastal mountain range, and dumping rain before the clouds cleared the mountains. Then as they cleared, they settled into a large valley between the coastal range and the Cascade Mountain range. We lived at the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Geographically speaking, both of the mountain ranges go north to south, and the clouds were coming off of the ocean from west to east. So the clouds were in the Willamette Valley between the mountain ranges. Then they moved eastward to the Cascade Mountain range, which is significantly higher than the coastal range. Once they hit the foothills of the Cascades, they dumped massive amounts of rain before moving higher and clearing the mountains and going to the eastern Oregon desert, where it rains very little. Later on I will get back to this. After that, I remember that I was thinking about doctrine in my dream state. Then I heard very, very clearly over and over the key of David. I turned over to get more comfortable, to sink into a deeper sleep, but I was urged to get up, clearly urged to wake fully and go to the computer. You see, I had heard about the key of David many times, but never truly got what it meant. So I looked it up. What I found was the truth. The Lord was showing me the path of Jonathan's origins. I know this was the Lord who did this, as He has been with me throughout all of this. I found a direct link to his beginnings. I googled Key of David and found this article. In it you will find information about a man and a church called the Philadelphia Church of God. It speaks about the man named Gerald Flurry. So after I read the article, I looked up Gerald Flurry and the Philadelphia Church of God. Here's the wiki article I found about him. In it you will find many, many parallels to Jonathan. However, this man established his church in 1989, 13 years before Jonathan. The man says he is a prophet and that God speaks through him. In 1990, Flurry published and started distributing Malachi's message to the members of the WCG. He claims this book was delivered to him by a mighty angel and is the prophesied little book found in Revelation 10. He teaches his followers that is revelation from God. Jonathan claims he was given the unrolled scroll and talks about solving the mysteries of everything. Sound familiar? There are many more examples of eerie similarities, but I'm sure you will all see them once you read this article, particularly the section on Mystery of the Ages and Prophecies. There's plenty of information on this individual out there on the internet. Remember, he was around 13 years before Jonathan, and his claims are almost exactly the same as Jonathan's. Please explore this, as I know you all will find it both disturbing and enlightening. Now on to the core doctrine. The Acts of Peter. About 18 years ago, I attended a university in Spokane, Washington. It is a Jesuit university. I took a class back then called Introduction to the New Testament. In the class, I was introduced to a textbook by Bart Ehrman. It covered the Lost Gospels and other Christian writings. This is where I was first exposed to Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Back then I found them interesting and potentially factual. Contained within the codices are the Dead Sea Scrolls is Codex 6, which contains the Acts of Peter and the Apostles. This is not the same work, however. Upon further digging about Gnosticism, which I will get into shortly, I discovered that the Acts of Peter, which we are familiar with, has its roots as a Coptic document included in what's known as the Berlin Codex. Contained within the Berlin Codex are three other documents: the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, and the Sophia of Jesus Christ. The Berlin Codex, also known as the Akhmim Codex, given the accession number Papyrus Berlinensis 8502, is a Coptic manuscript from the 5th century AD, unearthed in Akhmim, Egypt. In Cairo in January 1896, Karl Reinhardt bought the codex, which had been recently discovered wrapped in feathers in a niche in a wall at a Christian burial site. It was a papyrus-bound book, a codex, dating to early 5th century or possibly late 4th century, that was written in the Sahidic dialect of Coptic, which was in common use in Egypt during that time. He was taken to Berlin for the Berliner Museum, where it was brought to the notice of the Royal Prussian Academy of Sciences by Carl Schmidt, July 16, 1896. Schmidt edited the Act of Peter in 1903, but the Gnostic contents of the Berlin Codex were not finally completely translated until 1955. Few people paid attention to it until the 1970s, when a new generation of scholars of early Christianity took an increased interest in the wake of the discovery of the more famous group of early Gnostic Christian documents found at Nag Hammadi in 1945. Written probably by a resident in Asia Minor, he does not know much about Rome, not later than AD 200 in Greek. The author has read the Acts of John very carefully and modeled his language upon them. However, he was not so unorthodox as Lucius, though his language about the person of our Lord, chapter 20, has rather suspicious resemblances to that of the Acts of John. The length of the book, as given by the Stichometry of Nicephorus, was 2,750 lines, 50 lines less than the canonical Acts. The portions we have may be about the length of St. Mark's Gospel, and about 1,000 lines may be wanting. Such is Zahn's estimate. We have a short episode in Coptic, a large portion in Latin preserved in a single manuscript of the 7th century at Vercelli, often called the Vercelli Acts. It includes the martyrdom. The martyrdom, preserved separately in two good Greek copies in Latin and in many versions: Coptic, Slavonic, Syriac, Armenian, Arabic, Ethiopic. Also, one or two important quotations from lost portions, a smaller fragment of the original in a papyrus, certain passages, speeches of Peter, transferred by an unscrupulous writer to the life of Saint Abrasius Hierangelopoulos. 1. A Latin paraphrase of the martyrdom attributed to Linus, Peter's successor in the bishopric of Rome, was made from the Greek and is occasionally useful. Jonathan Kleck has stated in a video on July 21, 2018, titled Acts of Peter and More Miracles, starting at the 2-minute 9-second mark, that the Acts of Peter was left out of the Bible. Okay, it's okay, because I don't need the Acts of Peter at all to prove out everything. Yet it is the fundamental basis for his entire doctrine. In minute mark 3, 46 seconds, Jonathan Clegg states, "He's telling that to Agrippa right here, and I want to show you that because Peter also stood trial in front of Agrippa and he was sentenced to death." In the Bible, Acts 12, Peter was indeed apprehended by Agrippa I, King Herod, but never stood trial. It was in the Acts of Peter where Agrippa II, the son of King Herod, Agrippa I, who had imprisoned Peter in Acts 12, where Peter was, according to the Gnostic text, was sentenced to death and crucified. Acts 12:4 KJV. And when he had apprehended him, put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intended after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Acts of Peter 34. And whereas there was great trouble in Rome, Albinus made known his state unto Agrippa, saying to him, Either do thou avenge me of Peter that hath withdrawn my wife, or I will avenge myself. And Agrippa said, I have suffered the same at his hand, for he hath withdrawn my concubines. And Albinus said unto him, Why then tarriest thou, Agrippa? Let us find him and put him to death for a dealer in curious arts, that we may have our wives again, and avenge them which are also not able to put him to death, whose wives he is also parted from them.
They cast down upon the earth, changed about all the marks of your nature, that those things that were in truth evil are good. He changed everything reversed. And those, here it is, I'll read it again. He then being pulled down, who also cast his first state down upon the earth, established this whole disposition of all things, being hanged up in the image of creation, wherein he made the things of the right hand into the left hand, and the left hand into the right hand. That's called being turned upside down, guys. And he changed about all the marks of their nature, so that he thought that those things that were not fair to be fair, and those things that were in truth evil to be good. So their nature got changed around. What was not fair became fair, and what was really evil became good. Concerning, here it is, better pay attention now, concerning which the Lord saith in a mystery, unless you make the things of the right hand as those of the left, and those of the left as those of the right, and those that are above as those below, and those that are behind as those before, you shall not have knowledge of the kingdom. That is what I've been telling you since I got saved. 100% nylon. Doesn't make any sense. Turn it upside down. That's exactly what he just said right there. 100% nylon, no, change about. Make the things of the right, the things of the left, things of the left, things of the right. Those above as those below, and you get 100% no line. So the 100% nylon thing in the first shirt I looked at, do you know what a miracle that was that God made sure the night I got saved? I was carrying a couple pieces of clothing, and the very first one I looked at said 100% nylon, and that's it. And he told me to turn it upside down. Can you imagine? That's what resolved the whole mystery of everything. 100% nylon. Turn it upside down. That's what resolved everything. The entire Bible. That's what the Lord used me to do. To resolve it. Back engineer it.
Gnosticism. So just what is Gnosticism? Here is an article defining that very thing, Christian Gnosticism. In it, it states that Gnostics claim to possess an elevated knowledge, a higher truth known only to a certain few. Gnosticism comes from the word gnosis, which means to know. Gnostics claim to possess a higher knowledge, not from the Bible, but acquired on some mystical higher plane of existence. Gnostics see themselves as a privileged class, elevated above everybody else by their higher, deeper knowledge of God. Read the article for yourself. There are plenty of other sources out there about Gnosticism. It will give you a much greater understanding of the philosophy of Jonathan's teachings. His teachings are deeply steeped in Gnosticism, and one of the two texts that are the foundations of his teachings, the Acts of Peter, is an extra-biblical, Gnostic text found with the likes of the Gospel of Mary and the Sophia of Christ. Targum of Jonathan. What I have found about the Targum is this. It's an oral history of the Talmud written in Aramaic, as a lot of Jews at that time spoke Aramaic, not Hebrew. The status and the influence of the Targums became assured after the Second Temple was destroyed in AD 70, when synagogues replaced the temple as houses of worship. For it was in the synagogue that the practice of reading from the Old Testament became widely observed, along with the custom of providing these readings with a translation into Aramaic. When scripture was read aloud in the synagogue, it was translated aloud by a meturgeon, or professional interpreter, hence the name Targum, for the benefit of the congregation. The translator tried to reproduce the original text as closely as possible, but since his object was to give an intelligible rendering of the biblical text, the Targums eventually took on the character of paraphrase and commentary, leaving literal translation behind. To prevent misconceptions, a meturgeon expanded and explained what was obscure, adjusting the incidents of the past to the ideas of later times, emphasized the moral lesson to be learned from the biblical narratives, and adapted the rules and regulations of the scriptures to the conditions and requirements of the current age. The method by which the text was thus utilized as a vehicle for conveying homiletic discourses, traditional sayings, legends, and allegories is abundantly illustrated by the later Targums as opposed to the more literal translations of the earlier Targums. Though written, Targums gradually came into being. It was a living tradition of oral translation and exposition that was recognized as authoritative throughout the Talmudic period of the early centuries of the Christian era. The official recognition of the written Targum, and therefore the final fixing of its text, belongs to the post-Talmudic period in the 5th century AD. The best known, most literal, and possibly the earliest Targum is the Targum of Onkelos on the Pentateuch, which appeared in its final revision in the 3rd century AD. Other Targums include the Targum of Pseudo-Jonathan, the Samaritan Targum, and the Targum of Jonathan ben Uziel. It was written down and finalized much later than I thought. Specifically, the Targum of Jonathan ben Uziel was written down in the 3rd century AD. Linguistic analysis. The language of the Targum Jonathan is Aramaic. Its overall style is very similar to that of Targum Onkelos to the Pentateuch, though at times it seems to be a looser paraphrase of the biblical text. It is the result of a single redaction. Like Targum Onkelos, it gained general recognition in Babylonia in the 3rd century, and from the Babylonian academies it was carried through the diaspora. It originated, however, in the land of Israel, and was then adapted to the vernacular of Babylonia so that it contains the same linguistic peculiarities as the Targum Onkelos, including sporadic instances of Persian words. In cases where the land of Israel and Babylonian texts differ, this Targum follows the latter. Although Targum Jonathan was composed in antiquity, probably in the 2nd century CE, it is now known from medieval manuscripts, which may contain many textual variants. The earliest attestation appears as citations of Jeremiah 2:1-2 and Ezekiel 21:23 on an Aramaic incantation bowl found in Nippur, Babylonia. My point being is this is a text that has been paraphrased and altered to explain what was obscure, adjusted the incidents of the past to the ideas of later times, emphasized the moral lessons to be learned from biblical narratives, and adapted the rules and regulations of the scriptures to the conditions and requirements of the current age. This is the other text Jonathan is basing his ministry on. So we have two texts, one that is decidedly Gnostic in origin, Acts of Peter, lumped in with the likes of the Sophia of Jesus Christ and the Gospel of Mary, for which is argued that it is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the Targum of Jonathan ben Uziel, which was paraphrased and altered to suit the requirements of the age in which it was written. This has always been my contention about translations, and these translations were purposely altered to suit the cultural and idiomatic needs of the time. Then we have the Key of David and the Unrolled Scroll. The KJV, however, was translated with care to preserve meaning of the original texts, with approximately 95% of it word for word. Everything the Lord has for us is contained in the Bible. The written word for it contains the truth, for the truth is the living word, Jesus Christ. The first page on my search for the answer to what the key of David was says this for its conclusion. I truly believe that there is no better way to put it. Paul told Timothy to avoid myths and endless genealogies. These promote controversies rather than God's work, which is by faith. 1 Timothy 1:4. There is no special knowledge beyond the gospel itself that will aid salvation. Any claim beyond faith in the work of Jesus tears out the heart of the good news, that the just will live by faith. Romans 1:17. There is no great vision, special knowledge, or Jewish lineage needed. Only faith in Christ. Now back to my vision. It is the first that I ever had, but the Lord had impressed on me the profound truth contained within it. I had two personal interpretations of the vision. The first being the lies that Jonathan has said about us, among other lies he has said. The lies of the rain and the clouds are the truth. Each mountain range is the tremendous obstacles in our path. The fire we have to walk, so to speak. Once we are through the fire, past the obstacles, and we have separated the lies from the truth, we are able to clear that obstacle and move forward. Then I realized it is much bigger than that. Actually, the rain represents our burdens, the burdens of life. Doubt, fear, focusing on the things that do not matter and distract us, anger, bitterness, etc. This is what the Lord was telling me. The Lord is the only thing that matters. When you reach obstacles, release your burden, give it to the Lord, and He will lift you higher. Nothing else matters. So the confusion of Jonathan's teachings, which are steeped in Gnosticism and have the basis on a ministry that had existed 13 years before his conversion, is a burden. A burden that the Lord is saying let go of, because none of that matters. What matters is what is the written word found in the Bible. Everything we need is contained within it, nothing else. The Lord does not hide the truth from us. He gave His only Son, the truth, to show us the way. Peace be always with you. Jim.